Pingry Science has changed quite a bit since my time as a student. There are new faculty members, and there are new programs, like Journal Club and Project 80, and IRT has grown quite a lot. Pingry Science is only becoming more powerful, and there are more students leaving the program as tenacious scientists. One of these students I would like to introduce as your next and final speaker of the day. Katie is an impressive student, an impressive athlete, and an impressive scientist. Today, she will be speaking to you about the benefits of aversive learning. Katie Coyne.
So before I get started with the talk, I just wanted to give a few or a lot of thank yous. The first is to the entire bio department at Pingry and the science department in general, the teachers I've had, Dr. DeCilio, Ms. Lajerko, Mr. Dean, Mr. Maxwell, Mr. Bourne, Mr. Grant, and Mr. Weinkauf. All the way back in freshman year biology through the struggle that was honors physics, I felt so supported by them, and really this goes out to you, so thank you. Next up, I want to thank my IRT team for the past 2 years for encouraging a nerdy love of science and also for being great company during late nights at the lab. I want to thank the Journal Club team for helping me with both the Journal Club presentations and this presentation, and specifically for the help on this presentation, Sydney and Mark, Wesley, Jake, and Katya were tremendously helpful, staying with me here at 6 o'clock last night to make sure that this presentation was okay, so thank you. Next, I want to thank all the seniors on IRT who have been not only great people to work with, but great friends. Jackson, Kevin, Matt, Arjun, Owen, Aubrey, Marielle, and Emily, thank you for all that you do. And finally, the biggest thank you to my family for supporting me in everything, whether that is science, or field hockey, or just being a sister. Thank you. The title of my presentation today is Crime and Punishment, the Neurological Basis for Effective Motor Learning. Now, I have never taken criticism well, be that constructive or otherwise. And for a while, I believed in the old adage that it was better to learn through positivity, that, to be a good parent, you had to reinforce good behavior and provide rewards when your child did something well, and that when something bad happened, don't punish them, just reward the good things. And I really believed in that, because that's what my own learning experience reflected. But I had an experience recently that forced me to reconsider that dogma a little bit that I want to tell you about. Like a lot of other teenagers, one of the things I'm learning to do is learning how to drive. And I had plenty of learning experiences where I was rewarded for good behavior. To this day, some of the fondest moments I have with my younger sister Jenny are me taking a turn actually well and her saying, "Wow, that was really good." And my turns have improved. But I've also had my share of negative experiences driving. There was one day in particular where I was rushing to get home in the snow, and I pulled into the garage really quickly. My music was blaring, and then I heard it screech. Oh, that was the side of the car door against the side of the garage. I messed up, and I was punished for my behavior, but I want to be clear, I'm not talking about my parents punishing me, which they didn't, I just paid for it. I'm talking about that wave of anxiety I felt as soon as I heard that sound. Now, if I was designing a manual on how to teach Coyne how to drive, well, nowhere in that manual would I put, have her crash the car in the garage. But to this day, when I think about all the little things you have to remember driving, there's nothing that I'm more careful about than pulling into the garage with the right amount of pressure on the brake, looking at both shoulders to make sure I don't scrape the side of the car. So that got me thinking, is reward-based learning really always the best method? Or is there a value to punishment-based learning? That brings me to what I'm going to talk about today. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define reward-based learning and punishment-based learning. Then we're going to look at a study that examines the regions of the brain that are active in both learning pathways. Then we're going to look at a final study that looks at the effects of both reward-based learning and punishment-based learning on adaptation and retention. That sounds complicated, and we're going to go through step by step. So first, we need to define what learning actually is. Learning is a systematic, relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs through experience. Learning is knowing how to put the right amount of pressure on the brain. Conditioning is the process of learning associations that propel an individual to actually change their behavior. Enough times for me taking the turn and figuring out which angle I was turning at, that's the conditioning process. So is everyone good so far? Now, we can distinguish between types of conditioning in one way between appetitive conditioning and aversive conditioning. Appetitive conditioning involves the pairing of a neutral stimulus with a positive rewarding stimulus. If you're thinking carrot and stick, this is leading with a carrot. I perform behavior X and I am rewarded with Y, therefore I want to do X again and again. Aversive conditioning is quite the opposite. You have the same stimulus, or a piece of stimulus, and then you learn to associate it with a very unpleasant, punishing stimulus that you will do anything to avoid in the future. If we're going back to a carrot stick analogy, aversive conditioning is leading with a stick. You can think of appetitive conditioning as reward-based learning and aversive conditioning as punishment-based learning. The papers that I'm going to be looking at are looking at the difference in the brain depending on whether an individual is being appetitively conditioned, what's actually happening at a neurological level, or aversively conditioned, and then the effects of that conditioning on their performance. Is that good? Don't be afraid to say no. We have time. So let's look at an in-depth example of how I might aversively condition my dog. Let's say I decided that Polly really doesn't learn well through rewarding good behavior and it's time to try something else. And I want to get him to stop barking. So before I start any aversive learning process, there are two pathways that happen pretty much on their own. Polly, my dog, will think about barking, he'll bark, and he'll feel fine. Completely independent of that pathway, if my dog were to receive a tiny shock, nothing bad, he would feel a little bit of pain, and then he would experience anxiety. In order to condition him not to bark, it's going to be my job to link these two pathways. So how am I going to do that? Polly will think about barking, he'll bark, and then each time he barks, he'll receive a tiny shock. He will experience pain, and then he will experience anxiety. And I will repeat this process over and over and over and over again until it gets to the point where Polly only has to think about barking that he'll experience anxiety. He's going to associate this negative stimulus with a previously neutral action. And he doesn't need to go through any of the intermediate steps of barking and being shocked and feeling pain to know that he shouldn't have even thought of it in the first place. So, I said before that my papers are going to look at a neurological level of the process of aversive learning. So, what does a neurological level even mean? This is a picture of a neuron, and neurons are the basic cellular units of the brain. They send electrochemical impulses from one neuron to another that basically code for any task that a human is doing. They receive signals in through their dendrites, here. Signals are processed through the cell body, and they're sent out through the axon terminals to other dendrites. If we go back to this slide, on a neurological level, a more efficient pathway is being built from the neurons associated with thinking about barking to the ones that are associated with experiencing anxiety. The electrochemical impulses don't have to go through these other neurons to get to the point of anxiety. Make sense? Specifically, my papers are going to focus on the role of aversive learning in motor learning. What's motor learning? Motor learning is defined as a change in the capability for responding, which is a pretty vague and pretty unhelpful definition. It's most often related, though, to improving the physical ability to move. So either calibrating really simple movements or the smoothness and accuracy of more complicated ones. A baby learning to crawl correctly is a good example of motor learning. It'll take in a stimulus of like the feeling of their hand on the carpet and then pair it with another stimulus. Oh, there's fluid flowing in my inner ear. I feel off balance. It's because my hand's on the carpet with this amount of pressure. I need to change. That's motor learning. Fortunately, in my study, the motor learning that was going on seems like a much simpler task. The first study I looked at put their participants through a basic motor task, the concept of a video game. Participants saw a target flash on the screen, and they had to shoot at it as quickly as they could with their cursor. But they were divided into two groups. One group was learning via a rewards-based method, and one group was learning via a punishment-based method. If you were in the reward-based group, if you hit the target quick enough, you would see a positive number flash on the screen that you had been told corresponded to some sum of money you would make at the end of the study. If you were in the punishment-based group and you didn't hit the target quick enough, you would see a negative number flash on the screen that you were told corresponded with money you would lose at the end of the study. So this is a graph that the authors of the study used in their paper to try to explain how the study was set up. And I want to call your attention to the B side, the performance, because I think it does a good job of explaining what happened depending on what group you were in. Let's say you were in a game group, a group that was going to be rewarded for shooting the target quick enough. If you didn't hit it quick enough, you would see a positive number flash on the screen. If you didn't, nothing would happen. You would have a non-game. So different for being punished. If the group that was being punished hit the target quick enough, they wouldn't gain anything, they just wouldn't lose anything either. Nothing would happen. If, however, they hit the target too slowly, they would see a negative number flash on the screen, and a number they knew corresponded with some amount of money they would lose. Everyone good? Alright, so what would happen if you were in a group that was being rewarded for hitting the target accurately and you didn't hit it quick enough? You can raise your hand. Alright, let's go back. So if you were in a group that was going to be rewarded for your actions and you hit the target quick enough, you would receive a reward. However, because you were not being punished, if you didn't hit the target quick enough, you would have a neutral outcome. No number would flash on the screen. Using this example, can we apply the same thing to the people that were being punished? What would happen if someone was being punished and hit the target fast enough? Nicely done, good job. So,
What was the answer?
nothing would happen. If you're in a punishment-based group and you hit the target quick enough, that's great. You're not going to see that negative number flash on the screen. You're not going to be punished for doing something well, but you're also not going to be rewarded. The only way that you're learning is you're learning, ooh, you did this wrong, bad. Make sense? So, prior to completing the actual video game test, but after being explained the rules of the study, how they were going to be divided, what feedback they would receive, how this would affect how much money they made, the researchers took MRI imaging of their subjects' brains. The colors on the MRI correspond to activity in the brain. So on the left, you have subjects that were expecting to be rewarded on their performance. Now this is before they actually started the video game. They were just told, you're going to do a video game, and based on how well you do, you're going to make some money. The right-hand side, the subjects expecting monetary loss feedback. They hadn't started the video game yet, but they were told, hey, depending on how poorly you do, you'll lose money. And as you can see here, while there is coloring in similar regions of the brain, the two MRIs are nowhere near identical. This suggests that even before the conditioning process takes place, aversive learning and appetitive learning are starting in slightly different areas of the brain. But one MRI is not that much information, so the scientists wanted to look for more. The scientists then decided to measure the percentage of signal change in the left ventral striatum. And the left ventral striatum is just a region of the brain that has been implicated in learning. And when they were measuring signal change, scientists were measuring the amount of neuronal activity before they told the participants anything, and then after they told them the rules of the study. Why do you think they're measuring, if I told you that neurons send electrochemical impulses, why do you think it would make sense to measure the amount of electrical signal change in a brain? Yeah?
Compares the amount of neuronal fire quantified neuronal fire.
Cool. So one region of the brain is working in overdrive in some of these subjects, and one region of the brain is working a little bit less. In the blue, you have subjects that had been informed that they would be receiving money if they did well. In the gray, you have a control group that was told, no matter how poorly or well you do on the study, there will be no outcome for you. And in the red, you have a group that was informed that they would have a potential loss. They would be punished for not hitting the target accurately. And as you can see here, there's a statistically significant difference in the amount of signal change between the group that was told they might gain and the group that was told they might lose. So, if learning is happening in different regions of the brain and at different rates, it would make sense that it's happening by different mechanisms. The scientists also repeated this study in the medial prefrontal cortex, which is another region of the brain. In the light blue, the subjects were told that they could expect to be rewarded for hitting the target on time. The middle group was in control, and the right group is subjects who were told they could expect to be punished for not hitting the target quick enough. And as you can see, there are different amounts of signaling depending on what group you're in, suggesting that there are different pathways that either reward-based learning or punishment-based learning entails. Now, this graph, sorry, I should have said this earlier, but this graph is a little different than the previous one. This was taken after the subjects had completed their video game. The one before was as they were anticipating starting the video game. Yes?
This study taking into account whether or not these people were used to appetitive or aversive learning beforehand?
I can't say with this study, but in my second study, they did. They did a psychology test that's used by a psychologist, that's redundant, where they basically tested whether or not you're sensitive to criticism or to praise, and they found that the results were split 40% are really sensitive to criticism, 40% are really sensitive to praise, 20% either preference. So they concluded from that because the population was evenly distributed, it would skew their results. So what the scientists took away from this first study is that aversive learning and appetitive learning happen in slightly different regions of the brain at slightly different rates, which is where the second study comes in. If these pathways of learning happen in different regions at different rates, doesn't it make sense that they're used for different things? My second study was a lot more involved, but it was a similar premise. It was like a video game. Instead of trying to hit a target as quickly as possible, the subjects had to hit the target as accurately as possible. So their litter task was basically being rated on how close they were to a target that flashed on a computer screen. Scientists divided their participants into a group that would be rewarded for hitting the target very well, that's the R, a group that would be punished if they missed it, that's the P, and a random positive that functioned as a control. They put all their subjects through the same baseline where they established what a normal performance ability was for hitting this target accurately. Then, depending on what group you were put into, they gave them different feedback during an adaptation phase. If you were in a reward group, you would be playing the video game, and each time you hit the target, you would see a positive number flash on the screen, signaling that you had made some money. If you're in the punishment group, you'd be playing the video game, and you would see a negative number flash on the screen, indicating that you had lost some money. This is called the adaptation phase because scientists believe that with the addition of providing this feedback that was coupled to making or losing money, the subjects would adjust their behavior more. They would learn better with an additional incentive. Then, the scientists took away the feedback they were giving the subjects. They entered a no vision and a washout phase, which I will explain what both those words mean, in which subjects were simply playing the video game. Finally, they went into a readaptation phase, where the scientists provided the feedback again, and then again measured how much the subjects had learned, how much better their performance was in the readaptation phase compared to what their baseline was without any feedback. The no vision phase is just significant in that it had an extra obstacle in terms of hitting the target correctly. As the target flashed on the screen and your cursor went in to hit, the moment before the cursor would strike the target, it would disappear. Sounds annoying, it was meant to be. It was supposed to be an extra challenge for the participants. And the washout phase is much like the baseline. There was no feedback being provided to participants, they were just hitting the target as best they could. So, does anyone have any questions about this? Because this is a lot more complicated. Okay. So the scientists wanted to measure how much better the subjects performed during both the adaptation and readaptation phases compared to their baseline performance. They wanted to see what the differences were in how much the group that was being rewarded and how much the group that was being punished improved their initial performance. And I have a key here. So on the y-axis of this graph, you have learning rate. And learning rate is a function of, say they got 70% of the targets during their adaptation phase when they're supposed to be learning, and only 50% in the baseline. Learning rate is just how much they have improved. Does that make sense? Okay. And so during the adaptation phase, who can tell me which colored bar is the highest? This is an easy one. The black one. Who can read the key and tell me which group that was? The punishment group. So during the adaptation phase, when the subjects were receiving feedback, the ones that received the punishing feedback of, oh, you're going to lose money, those were the ones that adapted the most, that had the most improvement in their baseline performance. And the same was true during the readaptation phase, a bunch of times later. Throughout the course of that readaptation phase, the subjects that improved the most in their ability to hit the target accurately were the ones that had received that negative -1.5. But learning isn't just about adapting your behavior, it's about retaining what you have supposedly learned. And that is why the study was more complicated and had these intermediate phases. Scientists wanted to make sure that the subjects that they were supposedly teaching during the adaptation and readaptation phases remembered what they had learned. During the no vision period, they tested both the average direction and the decay rate of the punishment group, the reward group, and the control group. Now, average direction and decay rate are both functions of how much the individuals retained of what they had learned. A higher decay rate means that the individual retained more of what they learned, so does a higher average direction. And interestingly enough, scientists found that the individuals that were rewarded during their adaptation phases remembered more later on. They had better performance during the no vision phase of testing. So, can someone explain to me how these graphs demonstrate that the group that was rewarded retained the most? If the higher the average direction, there is more retention, and say for the higher the decay rate, there is more retention. Anyone want to venture a guess? Yeah?
I guess the red bar is higher.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you. So, we have something that seems to be a bit of a contradiction here. Individuals that were punished adapted much faster and much more efficiently. But it was the individuals that were rewarded for good behavior that retained what they'd learned. So where does this leave us? Clearly, there are different mechanisms for appetitive learning and aversive learning in the brain. Being punished or being rewarded for your behavior happens in different places with different rates of signaling, and is good for different situations. As we've seen in the second study, aversive learning produces a higher adaptation rate. But appetitive learning is important in that it produces that long-term retention. Both appetitive learning and aversive learning happen naturally. Both appetitive learning and aversive learning are functional. Now, the generation that I belong to has sometimes been referred to as the bubble wrap generation. This means to suggest that we are not allowed to really experience failure, that we're insulated from any feeling of inadequacy. Now, the bubble wrap is very well intentioned. It's supposed to protect our feelings, make us feel better, protect us from any really horrible consequences of what might happen. But I would argue that the bubble wrap generation disrupts a natural learning pathway that has been shown to have a role. Think about it. If you destroy the punishment mechanism, how do you pair that neutral stimulus to any consequence? Now, we have a lot of big problems in this world, and a lot of which learning underlies a solution, or at least a potential one. We cannot afford to dismiss any form of learning, be that appetitive, aversive learning, or something else, simply because we are averse of the negative connotation it might carry. Thank you.
One more time, everybody, Coyne.